President Trump is losing in a major way at the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land. He is facing what is a blow to one of the strategies that I've told you about, that we've been documenting, how they want to, from the White House, get some of these cases up to the court. But this conservative-leaning Supreme Court is rejecting one of those bids. This is not the final act, but it is a huge, important, key step, and a step that Trump lost. He basically wanted the court to side with him in a bid to defund and go after these USAID contractors. The move comes just about 12 hours after key parts of the address. So I'm going to show you how this went, because some of what the president said last night was false, just simple lies. Some of it was hopeful, meaning things that he, like any president, might want to achieve, and trying to tell the nation about that. And then some of it was proven false, because the president made claims about things he's doing in this joint sort of congressional press address, right, pressing his case to the whole country as they watch. But he was basically bragging about things he says he has done, which by the next morning, the court said, no, you haven't.
Upon taking office, I imposed an immediate freeze on all federal hiring, a freeze on all new federal regulations, and a freeze on all foreign aid.
The Supreme Court rejected the Trump administration's effort to freeze nearly $2 billion in foreign aid.
Yes, he tried the freeze. Yes, he said it. And by the next morning, that was the breaking news. The courts stopped it. And this is something that is a larger problem for Donald Trump for the reasons we've told you about, that he is deliberately, repeatedly going beyond precedent, the law, what courts have ruled in the past, and seeing if he can get away with it. And on this one, he's not getting away with it. There are more than one set of rulings. A lot of them start at the lower courts, as you probably know. We've covered all this. But this is the first major ruling that goes against the defunding plans. And it is a signal that while this, as I've mentioned, is not the final step in the case, right? You start with basically the early steps, and then the White House has tried to, when they've lost, appeal that to the Supreme Court, saying, we know we're losing, but please help us. And so this morning, the Supreme Court said, no, we're not helping you get out of this early jam, and you can't just defund, at least this way. The ruling was 5-4. And so that also gives us new information in this second Trump term, because we've got these justices, including the ones he put on the court. And so what you see here against Trump on this case, right, is a working majority of 5 justices. And I'm going to leave this up for you, because we could be following this for at least the next several years. This could be the coalition that sometimes says no to Trump, even though you see Barrett on there as a Trump appointee and you see Chief Justice Roberts, a Republican appointee. What you also see here is why the White House has this strategy, because they already have 4 votes for something like this, right? They narrowly lost, but they have 4 votes basically willing to go along with the rewriting of how funding and the power of the purse and congressional norms that go back 100 years. So you see those 5 going against the president. You see the 4, and we could see this coalition and this breakdown in the future. Roberts and Barrett also joined the liberal justices in that January ruling, which was a different topic. But again, if you cleave it on the line of just doing whatever Donald Trump demands or not, they said that sentencing in New York could go forward while he had those other justices siding with him. So this is a split. This is one of the battle lines that people follow. And remember, Donald Trump has pursued power in very aggressive ways that tested our system. And sometimes he lost, and sometimes the Supreme Court bailed him out. But other presidents have done this too. I'm not saying he's anything like FDR or Harry Truman. If you talk to historians and people who study this stuff, those are some of the high point presidencies for foreign policy and leading America. But there were big cases that you read about in law school about testing powers, which meant that the era of those different presidents was also tested by the era of those Supreme Courts. And we're seeing that replay now. And if everything I'm telling you sounds a little bit legal, a little bit in the weeds, I promise you I'm not just emphasizing this because I'm MSNBC's legal correspondent, because I'm a lawyer. I'm emphasizing this because when presidents test power, it is first and foremost the Supreme Court that is that block. We can debate whether members of Congress should yell more or less or hold up different paddles. People were talking about that last night. But it is always in our system of government the Supreme Court that matters most in quickly, before even a next election, saying no if you've exceeded authority. So this ruling today is important. It was concise and to the point. We know about the split because there was a dissent, but the unsigned majority ruling said this effort by Trump was denied. And then it had some legalese about saying the lower court ruling, which it was leaving in place after denying Trump's application, would still have to deal with the details of how to pause or slow down these efforts to defund things that Trump doesn't like. The reason why that's a big deal is if Congress funds it, then in most cases the president can't just cancel it after the funding law is passed. Supreme Court reporter Nina Totenberg also noted that the way this was done seemed unusual. The court majority basically said, if you dot your I's and cross your T's, we've got your back. Justice Alito had that dissent, which showed the four that I showed you, the four justices who wanted to do what Trump wanted. And he argued that a single district court judge should not have unchecked power to make the government pay basically the agreements it's agreed to. And then he threw in his own little kind of personal emotion. He is stunned. I am stunned, Alito says. Now, that's a reminder of how Justice Alito and certain members of the court have really given up any pretense of just hewing to the law and saying this fits our precedent or this doesn't, because when you say you're stunned, you're just sharing your emotions based on what your preconceptions were. I guess he thought there would be at least one extra vote, and he is stunned that there's not. But for him being an important member of the Supreme Court, if any other lawyer said that, you'd go, well, that sounds like a you problem, that the events on the court aren't matching the perceptions and expectations you had, and you feel stunned. Now, the context for this is a series of lower court losses, and we've been tracking this for you as the White House and President Trump test power even more than in the first term and basically dare the courts to do something about it. And we've seen 5 blows and 1 win this week alone. So we put that up here. Again, we're not going to go through every one of these, but we are tracking them for you, and we will bring you the key ones and the highlights. The SCOTUS, of course, at the highest court in the land being the most important. Supreme Court justices rejecting that foreign aid freeze. You also have the bid to slash funding for health and basically related research. A judge blocked that just today, separate case. Another court gave Trump a new victory, rejecting New York City's bid to get $80 million in FEMA aid back. And a judge just yesterday ruling Trump cannot legally fire federal workers on this board chair position, at least without cause. In other words, the rules and laws still matter. There's also been blocking of health care and other issues. This has been a rough week overall. It is, of course, the 6th of Trump's term. Several other setbacks include Musk's attempt to get data blocked, an appeals court maintaining a blockage on what I told you was never going to fly, which was Trump trying to rewrite the Constitution's citizenship rules. And when you take it together, if you think about what's happening, they are doing what Steve Bannon once talked about. They are flooding the zone. You don't have to read all of this again. I'm just doing something we rarely do, which is combine a bunch of graphics to show you they are throwing a bunch of stuff out there. But if you let your eyes just sort of glaze over all the red X's, you are seeing just how many of them are being blocked in various ways. And there are 90-plus lawsuits now. Some of this is happening in parts of the country and through efforts that you're not always going to see, even if we try to keep track of it in general, but it shows you where the fault lines are. Trump is losing at the highest court in the land, and many of the other efforts are running into checkpoints, those red X's or setbacks or freezes, even as many Americans tuned in and heard the president talk about this as if it was all going just according to plan, or as if things that were frozen and paused and might never happen are definitely going to happen.
I think that's correct, but I think that there's a longer run that Roberts has in mind, and that is that he doesn't want the court to look like hacks doing the bidding of a president who either supports them or nominated them to the bench. And I think Barrett must agree with that as well. And so now we have a couple of data points in that direction, so that the trust of Americans is dependent upon the perception of the court. And that's the way I see this decision. And it was a loss to Trump, but it was also important to note that when the per curiam was issued, they talked about the fact that Trump and company were acknowledging the order of the court, as opposed to, say, an Andrew Jackson thing in which they would just say, well, let them enforce it. That has not happened. So there are two things going on, and I hope and expect that we're going to see more of the same as necessary. And if I may add one other thing, I think if you read the dissent, which is 8 pages, by Alito, imagine if you're trying to sell that to Roberts or to Barrett, which is what happens when they're figuring out who is going to issue a decision and what it's going to say. And the Chief Justice always gets to assign if he's on the side that voted for the proposition. And I think if any of the judges of the 5 would have a lot of trouble adopting Alito, putting aside the question of stunning. So that's my first observation about it.